Hey everybody, Ian Bremmer here. Happy Monday, Coronavirus Monday. Every Monday kind of feels a little weird. It's like the start of the week, but at the same time, not really. I kind of understand, we don't really know how to assess time. Time is relative, as we say. I don't know if you guys saw this post I put out from the Georgia Department of Health that actually made their case numbers look like they were getting smaller, even though they weren't. There's recently been a spike by just taking the individual dates and moving them around so that it just put the caseload in order of reduction. I mean, that's one way at it, right? I mean, framing is important. Time is relative. But that's certainly lots to talk about this week, every week, while we are in the midst of what I think we will look back on and say is the first, hopefully only, depression of our lifetimes. So much more politicized this is getting in the United States, of course, because there's an election coming up, but also because politically there's almost no way to turn. On the one hand, the death toll, the numbers are going to be well over 100,000, and that was the frame of reference that President Trump said it would be a good job. They'd be very happy if they could keep it under 100,000. At the same time, we see Jay Powell, head of the Fed, who I think has done a very credible job through all of this, by the way, and speaks about it very credibly, and saying going forward that he thinks the third quarter, in fact, all of this year is going to be economically very painful indeed. So, I mean, if you can't turn towards loosening because there are too many cases and too many people dying, but you can't turn towards opening the economy for that reason, and so the economy is going so much worse, well, I mean, best not to have an election. Of course, that's not an option either. Can't push it back. People keep asking me that. No, you'd have to change the law, and that requires passing both the House and the Senate. Different parties control those two different houses. So, of course, there's no possibility of that happening. So really what it means is, number one, got to blame someone. That means China. And number two, it's just going to get so much nastier inside the United States. And, I saw some of the hearings last week. I saw Dr. Fauci get a lot of news, and he was attacked by some, particularly Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky, saying that he's not the be-all, end-all. I have to tell you, as much as I like Dr. Fauci, and I appreciate the fact that he is a voice of sanity and reason, I do accept that he's not the be-all, end-all, in the sense that if we're talking about when and how to open the economy, the doctors and scientists can't be the whole conversation. And you wouldn't want them to be, because they don't have the full range of expertise. I want the doctors and scientists to be the be-all, end-all in telling us how they think we should fight this coronavirus, what kind of treatments work and don't work, whether or not we should wear masks, what kind of social distancing is important, how we're doing on the vaccine, what kind of medical care and facilities we need, even things like how you do and don't treat assisted living facilities, something I wish that my own governor here, Cuomo, had been listening to Fauci earlier, so that we wouldn't have been sending all of these people from hospitals into these care facilities, spreading the virus so much beyond the capacity to deal with. So, of course, I think that they have enormous value there, and I don't like it when the politicians get involved in trying to say what is and is not an effective cure, second-guessing the doctors around that, whether it's Bolsonaro in Brazil or Trump here in the United States, or, God forbid, Lukashenko in Belarus, or Magufuli in Tanzania. I mean, there are some real winners out there, some real buttes, as they say. But when you talk about opening the economy, when you talk about ending the lockdowns, you're not just talking about doctors anymore. You're also talking about expertise from economists, expertise from business people, people that understand what it means if you keep these economies locked down. And what worries me is we've gone from the first months of the crisis where we didn't know what we were dealing with, what kind of a virus it was. We didn't understand, had no parameters around testing, how broadly it expanded, didn't really understand how it was transmitted, a time when you desperately would need to hear from almost exclusively the healthcare folks, to now when you want the healthcare folks and all the people with economic expertise, because there's a real trade-off between how much you can open the economy and how many people will be endangered in terms of their health as a consequence of that, and how much you keep the economy closed and how much people are endangered as a consequence of that. Literally endangered in terms of being able to make ends meet, in terms of what it's going to cost to take care of these people. I mean, at the end of the day, governance in the United States and around the world is always about trade-offs. It's about costs, how much you want to spend on one thing as opposed to another, on healthcare as opposed to unemployment, on a single portion of the population as opposed to another. What we do know is that so much of this crisis is being borne on the shoulders of those that really can't afford it. The essential workers who can't work at a distance, can't stay at home and still get paid. The ones that are right now delivering your takeout meals and stocking the grocery stores and ensuring that there's first responder capacity to someone dialing in a crime or committing one, or to someone who is going to a hospital. And yet, of course, these people are not paid as essential workers. They're paid as dispensable workers. And is that going to change in 3 and 6 months and 12 months and 3 years' time? It has to, because otherwise the ability to ensure sustainable consumption models isn't going to be fit for governance. The ability to consider yourself a representative democracy isn't going to be fit for governance in this country. And on the other hand, the people that are most dispensable in terms of the companies as they open again, and who do they and do they not need to make sure that they can continue to be profitable. So many of the layoffs that you've seen in the past 2 months are going to end up being permanent, because companies will go bankrupt and others can't afford to keep these people employed. And, you know, I keep thinking back to the 2008 financial crisis, when there wasn't that much macro analysis politically that was really being done. There was a sense, of course, that all the markets were moving up and down together. That's very macro. And you certainly wanted to understand the financial sector very deeply. You wanted to understand the central banks. You wanted to understand, you know, what leverage was all about in a lot of these mortgage-backed securities that didn't make a lot of sense, and how big the bubble actually was. You wanted that understanding. But beyond that, you know, that's what you needed to fix. You didn't necessarily need to talk to a whole bunch of people with all this expertise in different sectors around the economy. Today, every person that touches an industry, every person that touches a piece of government has a piece of expertise that really matters to understanding this puzzle, because you've shut down the entire global economy. And if you want to reopen it through your leaders, reopen it through your business executives, and reopen it through your workers and your consumers, every piece of that needs to get back into place. And that means everyone you talk to with a different part of expertise actually plays a role. And so if you're talking to a CEO of a financial institution right now, they're worried about how can they make money when so many of the small business owners are not able to pay their credit card bills going forward. They're not able to make good on their leases or their mortgages. And so what does that mean in already a low interest environment where banks have to maintain higher credit levels? How are these banks going to stay solvent in a year and 2 years' time, as you see financial crises in some of the developing markets? When you talk to the tech firms who are making a lot of money right now, but they're saying, hey, we're running pretty well with people not being in place, and we don't want to have any legal vulnerability, and if they can do the work, we can't tell these people they have to come back. So if you're Twitter, just stay at work from home forever. If you're Facebook, if you're Google, well, at least until the end of this year, and even then it's going to be staggered. Well, how much real estate do you need as a consequence? And, what about the people that work in physical plant and that work in the cafeterias, the janitors, sanitation, all of the people that make those spaces function? You won't need as many of them. Well, maybe you don't hire as many of them. What happens to those people? Talk to people in food supply. They have a just-in-time supply chain here in the United States and around the world. And suddenly, that's a real problem because it's really efficient and the lines run really fast and these workers are all on top of each other. And, well, how do you protect them? So maybe you need to have them stagger in 3 different shifts over time, but you've got to pay them more if they're working in unusual shifts. And, well, maybe you move towards automation, or maybe you shut down the lines, you slow down the lines. And how do you maintain profit when that happens? What happens to these workers? Open plan. I mean, here at Eurasia Group, space for a couple hundred people, all open plan. That doesn't work when you're trying to keep people distant and safe from each other. You're going to have to completely rejigger the way that an accounting firm works, a consulting firm works, the big 3 out there. How many people are they going to need as a consequence of that? How are they going to maintain efficiency? It's not like people were just swimming on cash. Most of these profitability models, were comparatively tight because it's a very competitive environment. And you see a lot of companies that go bankrupt in the best of times. So, I mean, clearly, every piece of the global economy doesn't just have to get through the shutdown, the lockdown, this incredibly challenging, unprecedented in our lifetimes disruption, a natural disaster to end all natural disasters in our lifetimes, this pandemic. But then when they come back, nothing is as it was. Nothing goes back to being the way it was. And that doesn't mean, this doesn't make me existentially pessimistic. This doesn't make me feel like it's the end of society. But it does make me feel like the changes that are required are going to be much more dramatic, much more structural, and a lot more people will be displaced. So government's going to have to play a much more interventionist and a much more structural role that we don't like so much in the United States. It's not efficient. Take your hands off. We don't want spiraling debt beyond where it already is. Makes me worried that the ability of big industry to be the answer when government isn't there, doesn't have all the answers, is going to fall down on the job. They're going to have a real challenge doing it because they're going to be under a lot of pressure. And it makes me feel that the willingness of the average citizen in a lot of these democracies themselves going to feel like the system is increasingly not working for them. Now, does that mean that I think the Chinese system somehow works better? Absolutely not. In fact, the Chinese are going to have much bigger problems themselves. I mean, this is the first recession that they've had since they've really started opening up. And I mean, 0 growth for a year on top of the massive credit bubble that they have, not only spiraling debt that hasn't gotten productive gains in China from a sovereign perspective, but also the staggering corporate debt that's not been linked to productive and efficient growth. The Belt and Road and all of the defaults and the restructuring that's already need to happen in some of the poorest countries around the world. And now a lot of those very economies that China has the greatest exposure to are going to collapse because they've got even bigger problems going forward. So, I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to be counting my future on the sustainability of that massive credit bubble, either domestically in China or internationally. So again, I mean, the good news is that you have a disruption of this scale, and it actually gives you the necessity, the capacity to change a lot of the institutions that increasingly weren't working. But let us not pretend that this is like 2008, 2009. We'll spend a year or two and then things will bounce back, because that's what happened, basically. I mean, the banks had to reform, but generally we kind of bounced back after 2008, 2009. This is a very different scale of magnitude, and this is one we're going to have very different institutions and global order as we think about what it means to have sustainability in society going forward. So that's a little bit for me. Talk to you guys soon.